All right, hello everyone, welcome back. It's time for another video. Today we're going to go over the Vietnam War. I'm going to do something a little bit different today. Normally I have a PowerPoint that I go through and then we answer the questions. There is a PowerPoint that goes with this, and in fact I've got a couple of PowerPoints. And I will upload those to my website, but what I wanted to do to kind of save some time on your end and save some time on my end as well is just kind of skip over the PowerPoint and let you go back and look at that on your own time. And I'm just going to go straight into the information and the important content knowledge that you need to know about the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War is a very interesting time period. It's a very controversial time period, and we're going to see a lot of drama that happens and really kind of just sad overall, a sad time period in history. So again, you can visit my website and download the PowerPoint. You'll be able to download the notes. And if you need any help on any of this, make sure to email me. You can pause the video as needed as I go through this. Let me take a look and make sure it's looking good on there. Yeah, it looks good. It's definitely legible. Okay, so let's just jump right in and we'll get into all the details and we'll get through the war and everything's going to be lovely. All right, let's use purple today. All right, so the Vietnam War lasted from 1964 to 1975. The U.S. involvement ends in the war. The U.S. gets out of the war a little bit early, and we're going to talk about the reasons why here later. The U.S. gets out of the war in 1973. Essentially, the war was not going the way we thought it needed to go, and we saw that we're basically fighting a losing war, so the U.S. leaves early, but we'll get into that later. All right, the combatants, aka the fighters in the war, they are North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. They are rebels in the South versus the Republic of South Vietnam with help from the USA, aka us. All right? Now, it's very simple, and it's kind of a review here. The essential cause is that North Vietnam tried to spread communism to South Vietnam, and the U.S. has a policy of containment, and that's why we get involved. And remember, containment just means the U.S. does not want communism to spread, okay? And how does the actual war go? What is the result? Essentially, America struggles in Vietnam because the Viet Cong use a style of warfare called guerrilla warfare, which is where you use ambushes, sneak attacks, hit-and-run style warfare, okay? And South Vietnam fell under communist control in 1975. So America is seen as having lost this war because we failed to stop the spread of communism. Okay? So because America's goal was to stop South Vietnam from becoming communist, we are seen as having lost the war because eventually South Vietnam does become communist. Okay? So that is the overall basic kind of idea behind the Vietnam War and what it's all about. But now we need to go into the history of why this Vietnam War even happens, okay? So let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to erase this now. If you need it, pause, but let's go ahead and rock and roll. All right, so the question number one, what was the relationship between Vietnam and France? Vietnam was a French colony. Vietnam was a French colony, okay? And we know that like a lot of colonies in their mother countries or their homelands, usually the relationship is pretty bad. So how did the French treat the Vietnamese? Poorly, okay? So there's going to be a revolution under this leader, Ho Chi Minh. He is a communist who led a rebellion against the French. And they actually win. The communists in North Vietnam win because this happens in 1946 to 1954. And there was a little something that France was recovering from, aka the World War II. There you go. And later in North Vietnam, he becomes president until 1969 or 1979. There's a lot of dates in this, so I'm going to be checking here. So he's president of North Vietnam. I didn't write it down, but I do believe it's 1979, 69, 79. Doesn't matter. Okay. But remember, Ho Chi Minh, he is essentially what you need to know about him, and the reason why the U.S. is not a fan is because he is a communist, okay? Now, President Truman is concerned when this war breaks out between Vietnam and France, and there's a reason why. It's called the domino theory, okay? And basically what the domino theory means is that if one country becomes communist, the surrounding countries will fall, okay? So that is where countries fall to communism. Countries fall to communism. All right? So Truman takes some action, and his actions are that he sent money to the French but it doesn't help. Okay? France loses the war, they can't compete with Ho Chi Minh's guerrilla style of fighting, and France has to pull out. So now Vietnam is going to be divided in two. North Vietnam, which is communist, and South Vietnam, which is not communist, okay? But they do have this really weird, powerful government. We'll talk about that in just a second. All right, so the Geneva Accords, they are a treaty that divided North and South Vietnam. Treaty that divided North and South Vietnam, okay? But here's the thing. The new government that was created in South Vietnam was really unpopular with the people, okay? So disliked it. A lot of people disliked the government in South Vietnam and wanted to be communist like the North. Okay, so I'm gonna have to explain something in just a second. Let me finish writing this. So Vietnam, when France leaves, Vietnam is left as a poor country on both sides, North and South. Now, so you might be wondering, why would anybody want to be a communist? Well, communist countries and communist governments appeal to poor people because, remember, in a communist society, it's a classless society. The government does kind of look out for poor people in that it supplies them with monthly pay and monthly food allotments, things like that. So in South Vietnam, where they were where they wanted to be communist, is because they needed money, they needed food, they needed supplies and things like that. And the government in South Vietnam is not communist, so they want to be like the North, okay? So I know that's confusing, but it's going to play out here in just a little bit and you'll understand, okay? So remember, it's the North Vietnam versus South Vietnam, but a lot of Southern Vietnamese become Viet Cong, aka VC. They want to be communist rebels, okay? All right, now, after the Geneva Accords, how did the North Vietnamese communists support rebels in the South? They sent weapons along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and I'm gonna tell you about that here in just a little bit. Along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And then how did the U.S. react to civil unrest in South Vietnam in the early 1950s? They sent in the military, sent in small military. Not a lot of military yet, but I'm going to tell you it's going to grow. Okay, so that says military there. All right, so I'm going to explain more. I'm going to pull up a map here in just a second, but basically, the Southern Vietnamese that wanted to be communists, they become the VC, aka the Viet Cong, all right? And they receive weapons to fight. They want to have a revolution just like in North Vietnam, like how they had against the French. They want to have a revolution too, so they get weapons along this secret thing called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And let me pull up a map over here and I'll display it over there and show you what I'm talking about. All right, 2 seconds. Perfect. Okay. So pause there if you need it, and let's go. So North Vietnam and South Vietnam, they're divided by the 17th parallel. So this is after the French are kicked out, okay? And so the communists are down here in South Vietnam, and they want to be communists like in North Vietnam. So the Viet Cong are down here, okay? So Viet Cong are down here, not out in the ocean. They're in South Vietnam, okay? And the communists are up here in North Vietnam, and there's this trail that's called the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and it runs through Laos, Thailand, and Cambodia. And what they do is they send money, weapons, and supplies down to the Viet Cong, down to those rebels in the South, okay? So that way they can fight a war against their government and hopefully become communists. So that's why the U.S. steps in and says, well, we need to send some people in to kind of keep an eye on things. They don't send a full military in yet, we'll get there, okay? I'm gonna show you a couple pictures while I'm at it on this thing. So here's Vietnam in relation to the rest of the world, and this is before the French left, okay? This is Ho Chi Minh here. There he is as a young man and an old man. He's president of North Vietnam. He is a communist, okay? And there's the map again that's all divided up. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and explain this real quick since we've got it here, and then I'll go back to the thing here. So in the Gulf of Tonkin, which is right here, there were American boats. This is in the early 1960s, okay? There are American boats hanging out, just kind of keeping an eye on the whole situation in Vietnam, all right? And supposedly, a newspaper headline, and what is most likely yellow journalism, remember, which is exaggerated headlines, there was reports of Vietnamese attack on American boats. And so President Johnson, this guy, Lyndon B. Johnson, says this is reason to send in the military and take action against the North Vietnamese. And this is called the Gulf of Tonkin incident, because it happens here in the Gulf of Tonkin. And the resolution that he issues to send the military over there is called the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. So let me get back to the sheet, and we will go over the answers that you need to know. All right. So let's do this thing. So it says what happened in the Gulf of Tonkin in 8/2/1964. So what happened is that Vietnamese boats, supposedly, we don't know how 100% true this is, Vietnamese boats torpedoed an American boat. Okay. And then by the end of 1968, there are, I believe, 580,000. Let me double check that number. I'm not good with numbers. 500,000 by the end of 1968. 500,000 American troops by the end of 1968. So now we're in the war, okay? But we actually never declared war. Because of this Gulf of Tonkin resolution, President Johnson is able to send in this many American troops without ever actually declaring war. America is not, as the public and the government, they're really not super interested in having another war. Remember, World War II, up to this point, is really only about 20 years ago. So World War II is still pretty fresh in everybody's memory. And not only that, the Cold War is going on. So everybody's a little bit worried. And not only that, the Korean War was just 10 years before this. So America is not a huge fan of going to war here, but because of this, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, we never actually declared war on Vietnam, but President Johnson sends in troops anyway, okay? Now, it's a struggle, this fight. The Viet Cong, they are the rebels in the South who want to be communists. The Viet Cong are very good at fighting a guerrilla-style warfare, okay? Guerrilla-style war. Now, the U.S. has a very excellent military, the best in the world, but they are not prepared to fight in tunnels and jungles. So they have to fight through the jungle, and the Viet Cong have a very elaborate system of tunnels in which they can hide, move, and are able to evade the Americans, okay? And I'll show you a picture of that here in just a second, all right? I'm gonna go ahead and explain these two questions, and we'll go back to that PowerPoint, because I do want to show you some more pictures, all right? So there's something known as the Tet Offensive that happens in 1968 during the war, okay? And the Tet Offensive, what it is, Tet is a holiday in Vietnam, and for this holiday, it's a New Year's holiday, and for this holiday, they declared a ceasefire, okay? So there was a ceasefire leading up to this holiday. Now, this was a big plan by the VC in North Vietnam to catch the American military off guard. They said, hey, we're gonna have a little truce, we're gonna have a little peacetime during this holiday. Y'all don't worry, we're not gonna attack you, blah, blah, blah. Basically all a big trick. And during Tet, the VC and the North Vietnam actually attacked a lot of big cities in South Vietnam and took them over, okay? And this showed that America was probably going to lose the war, all right? So what is the overall effect, or the initial effect? America was going to lose the war, essentially. Now, if you read the history books, it's going to read a little bit differently, because here's why. The Tet Offensive, after the Tet Offensive, the U.S. retaliates big time, okay? Militarily, after Tet, America dominated. However, this is a different type of war. This is a war called a living room war, and we'll talk about that later. And essentially what's happening is every single day, Americans at home are seeing the war being broadcast to them through TV. Remember, TV is a new technology at this point, and Americans are seeing the war daily. So when they see this Tet Offensive happen, where America, the world's strongest military, is defeated because of a surprise attack, they are not happy. Even though afterwards America goes back and dominates and kills so many North Vietnamese and kills so many Viet Cong, America's attitude has already changed. So the Tet Offensive has made the war extremely unpopular. Okay, made the war extremely unpopular. Because America's looking at this and they're saying, look, these little rebels, these everyday normal people, who are just good at fighting in the jungle and hiding in tunnels are beating the world's best military. And they're saying, we don't even really know why we're over there. We're containing the spread of communism. So it's just a really weird and kind of sad war, okay? So now what I want to do is I want to show you a diagram of the tunnels and show you some pictures of the Tet Offensive. I know I said I wasn't going to show you pictures, but it really brings it to life. And there's so much good media from the Vietnam War. Okay? So let's check this out. So here again is Johnson, and he's signing the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which says that America can use military force in Vietnam. All right, now, here's why America struggled against the Vietnam War, or against the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. It's because they built these elaborate tunnel systems, and if you ever watch the movie, it's called Platoon, it's about the Vietnam War. They do a pretty good job of showing these tunnel systems. So essentially, Americans would patrol through rural villages out in the Vietnamese countryside, and they would discover these tunnels where the VC would hide. The VC, again, those are the Viet Cong, the communist rebels in the South, okay? And they would have to clear out these tunnels because the enemy would be hiding there. And along the way, they'd encounter several different traps and things like that. And I'll let you look at the PowerPoint on your own, and you'll see scorpions, snakes, various enemy hiding there. But you can see, like this, for example, you wouldn't even be able to tell this is there if the cover was on it, all right? Now let's move on to the Tet Offensive. So the powerful images that come from this are really what change America's view about the war. If you look at this image here, this is a crew of Americans who have just suffered under an attack. And if you look at this young man here, this guy, I think, I've seen an interview of him. I think at the time he was only 17. So you guys at home, y'all are juniors, y'all are 17, some of y'all even 18, so he may have been 18, but around your same age. But what this showed, Americans at home saw this and they said, what are we even doing over there? This is a young man, this is a child essentially, and all we're doing is fighting to contain the spread of communism. It was a very unpopular war, and when they see images like this, and especially too, images like this, they see a lot of graphic violence that comes from the media at home, okay? So what's going on here? This guy is a VC member, aka the Viet Cong. So he is a VC member and he has been caught by a South Vietnamese, okay, South Vietnamese general. And so these guys, and I know this is super confusing, they are friends with the USA, okay? And he has been caught and he is literally being executed on camera. There's video of this. I wouldn't watch it if I were you. I've seen it. It's not good, okay? But just know that this media changes the way the war is viewed. It's a game changer. And the Vietnam War, because of all this media, because of all this exposure, it turns out to be very unpopular, and it turns out to be a war that America realizes they're really not going to win when you're facing situations such as those, okay? So let's keep rocking and rolling here and move along to some more questions. All right, so the Ho Chi Minh Trail, as I showed you earlier, it runs through Cambodia. And the U.S. realized they were struggling. So when the U.S. realized they were struggling, they decided, you know what, let's just engage in large-scale bombing, all right? So the reason why we bombed Cambodia is to try to dismantle or disable the weapons supply on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, okay? To try to dismantle the weapons supply on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And now, here's the thing. We bombed all these rural areas in Cambodia, and we actually caused a famine there, all right? And as a result of the famine, a lot of the people that lived in rural villages moved to the cities. The cities could not handle this large influx of population, and violence broke out, and they had a terrible civil war in which about 2 to 3 million Cambodians were killed. So America really kind of engaged in some really bad behavior in Southeast Asia as far as, because we didn't accomplish our goal, we didn't stop the spread of communism. Cambodia eventually actually becomes communist and under a totalitarian leader named Pol Pot, and so really America just kind of had a hot mess on their hands in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. But we continued to fight rather than just withdrawing early, and we continued to increase the amount of weapons that we used, including the use of napalm. If you don't know what napalm is, it is a firebomb, all right? And I'll show you pictures here in just a second. It's essentially a bomb that explodes, and when it explodes, it shoots out a jelly-like substance. It's very sticky, and it sticks to everything around it and causes massive burns and bad things like that, okay? Now, why did the U.S. use napalm against the NVA and VC? To try to blow out the tunnels. They figured if we can drop these bombs let me write this down first, to try to blow out the tunnels. They figured if we can drop the bombs on the tunnels, the napalm will go down into the tunnels, it'll burn up the enemy, etc. Now here's the problem. As I showed you in the picture earlier, a lot of these tunnels are located in villages. So villagers, normal everyday Vietnamese people, not the enemy, end up getting killed and burned and terribly scarred by this napalm. It's really bad. Now, remember, the Vietnam War is different. The Vietnam War is seen every day at home by normal everyday Americans in the public through TV and media. And America sees some terrible images, and I'll show you here in just a little bit. America sees some terrible images of these things, and it makes the war extremely unpopular. And I think I already wrote that exact phrase, but just remember, the war is not a very good thing, this Vietnam War, okay? This is a horrible, horrible situation, okay? So the war becomes even more unpopular. All right, I'm going to go ahead and do this one about Agent Orange. There's a couple more questions about Agent Orange, but I'm going to do this one, then I'll show you some pictures and give you some dialogue about it, okay? So Agent Orange, what it is, it's plant killer. And the reason why it was widely used in Vietnam, it could destroy jungles, all right? Literally, it could destroy whole jungles, and I'll show you some pictures here in just a little bit. It's a plant killer used to destroy jungles, all right? Now, the VC and the North Vietnamese, they hid out in jungles. So the U.S. figured if we just burn down all the jungles, or if we kill them all with chemicals like Agent Orange, then they won't have hiding places. Now here's the problem. It uses a dangerous chemical called dioxin. And dioxin is known to cause cancer. Dioxin that causes cancer and also birth defects, all right? And serious, serious birth defects. And I'm going to show you some images here in just a moment. So Agent Orange and napalm are two very controversial weapons, and Agent Orange is actually not, it's illegal now. But they're used to try to end this guerrilla-style warfare. America saw that they weren't doing well against the guerrilla warfare, and so they said, hey, we're going to try everything we can, including some really terrible things, okay? So I'm going to show you some pictures now. I'm going to warn you right now that these images are pretty graphic, so if you don't like this stuff, skip this part of the video, all right? So here we go. So first off, there again, the Tet Offensive. So the bombing of Cambodia, everything that you see in red was carpet bombed. This thing called carpet bombing, and you can literally see the amount of bombs that were dropped. It literally covers an area like carpet. All right, something like 285 million bombs were dropped in Cambodia. All right. So everything that you see in red here was areas that were bombed by the USA trying to take out the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Remember, the Ho Chi Minh Trail ran through North Vietnam down into South Vietnam, and they ran weapons and supplies along that, okay? All right, so that is about the Cambodian bombing. All right, now, so this is napalm being dropped, and you can see it creates an extreme amount of fire. Here we have a young baby who is a victim of napalm, and you can see his skin and his clothes are just hanging off of him. He's been burned, most likely dead. This child here, you can see her skin is hanging off here. This is actually a very famous image. It's known as the Napalm Girl. There's a lot of interesting stuff up on the internet about the Napalm Girl. I don't want to show you the full image because she doesn't have any clothes on at all. She did survive. But when this image comes out, because she's literally walking down the street and this image came out in the American media, people at home saw this, people at home in America saw this, and they said, these are kids, these are not the enemy, what are we doing over there? We're dropping this terrible weapon on a child, on another child, on an old lady. What is going on in Vietnam? This is a hot mess. Now the next image is going to be even more graphic, okay? So Agent Orange, it's this chemical that's being dropped on the jungles of Vietnam up here, okay? So that's what's going on up here, and it contains this chemical called dioxin. And like I said earlier, dioxin causes cancer, and it also causes birth defects. And these are children who are born in Vietnam whose parents were exposed to dioxin, whose parents were exposed to Agent Orange. And you can see they've had some terrible, terrible birth defects. This stuff is really, really sad. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on because this is not good. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the slide, and then we will move. All right. So let's go ahead and answer one more question about Agent Orange, and then we'll move on to Vietnamization. So there are some groups of people that have suffered long term, and these are going to be veterans, American veterans. And Vietnamese children, as you saw. Okay? Now, you may be asking, why doesn't somebody do anything about this? Well, people have tried to sue our government over the use of Agent Orange. And the government acknowledges that it did do some things in Vietnam that were inappropriate, but the U.S. refuses to admit that it committed war crimes. So U.S. government refuses to admit that it committed war crimes. Because in a way, this is chemical warfare. To admit that Agent Orange was a war crime. There you go. All right, so let's move on. So sad, the stuff about Agent Orange is really terrible, okay? But let's go ahead and talk about Vietnamization. So Vietnamization is Nixon's policy, and Nixon comes into power late 60s, early 70s, I don't know exactly which, you know I'm not big on dates. But Vietnamization just means it's the process of pulling American troops out of Vietnam. Let's see exactly how I worded it so I don't write too much. I don't want to wear you out. So he wants to bring U.S. troops home and train South Vietnamese to take over the war. So he wants to bring home American troops and train South Vietnam to take over. So basically America is saying here, Nixon is saying here, we're kind of ready to be out of this war, but we can't just leave because we know what's going to happen. They're going to fall to communists. And so they're going to train the South Vietnamese to take over, okay? The main effect of the Paris Peace Accords is that America pulls out of the war. America's out of the war by 1973. America pulled out of the war. And then by 1975, South Vietnam had fallen to communism, all right? North Vietnam conquered the South by 1975. Conquered South Vietnam by 1975. There you go. All right, so why is America seen as having lost the Vietnam War? Well, North Vietnam was communist. America's goal was to try to stop the spread of communism. If you notice right here, North Vietnam did conquer South Vietnam, so we failed, all right? America failed to control the spread of communism. Failed to control the spread of communism. All right, so what is the cost of the war, both in dollars and in lives? In lives, it's 58,000 Americans and 2 million South Vietnamese, okay? And $100 billion. 100 billion and 58,000 Americans dead. Crazy. All right. Now, believe it or not, Vietnam is actually a pretty prosperous country today, and Vietnam and America are actually pretty good friends. So Vietnamese-American relations, friendly. Overall, pretty good. Vietnam is still technically communist, although they've kind of changed to more of a free market system because they saw that they could actually make more money that way. So we're actually friendly with them now. And how is the Vietnam War in American history? It's viewed as largely being a mistake overall. I do definitely, and we do definitely appreciate the sacrifices of the American soldiers. It's on the behalf of the government that is considered a big mistake. Terrible, terrible thing. So many lives lost, and really basically more or less for nothing because America did fail to accomplish its goal, unfortunately. It's a shame. It's a truly sad, sad situation. Okay? All right, so let's keep rocking and rolling, and let's go through some of the presidents that you need to know and their policies. Right. Almost done. So Kennedy believed in the domino theory, and he sent in money and special forces troops to train the South Vietnamese army. Okay, it says money. All right. Kennedy's actions encouraged the South Vietnamese in their fight against the spread of communism. So Kennedy wants to stop communism. Kennedy died in 1963, towards the tail end in November of 1963. So then Johnson takes over. Now Johnson is more aggressive as far as the Vietnam War goes. Johnson ordered military action to occur after the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Remember, the Gulf of Tonkin is where the Vietnamese boats targeted an American boat. And Johnson used the draft, and we're going to talk about the draft here in just a few minutes, to recruit soldiers. The draft is super unpopular. By the end of 1968, there were almost 500,000 American troops in Vietnam. That's a lot. When the Tet Offensive occurred, Johnson and the war lost American public support. All right. And the growing unpopularity of the war and Johnson's continued increase of American troops allowed him to only serve one term as president. Americans simply wanted the war to be over. So Johnson kind of refused to give up. He kind of refused to see all the signs after the Tet Offensive and everything that the war is just not going well and that America doesn't want to be there anyway, but he refused to give up. So he used things like the draft, and we'll talk about the draft here in just a little bit. And to try to keep the war going and to try to win the war, but what he didn't see was that it was just a losing case, okay? It was a lost cause. All right, now, Nixon, he began something called the policy of Vietnamization, and we went over that just a couple minutes ago. But Vietnamization means pulling the troops out of Vietnam, but he also began the bombing campaign of Cambodia. Now, Vietnamization looks really good to Americans, but Americans are actually not aware that we're bombing the crap out of Cambodia. It's really bad, okay? Now, Nixon ended the draft, which makes him another popular candidate, and he ended American involvement in the war, meaning we're done with the war by 1973. A new policy, aka the Nixon Doctrine, which was created, that said we'll send money and weapons to countries in their fight against communism, but no more American troops. At this point, the American public has made it pretty clear they didn't really care about sending in their men to fight in, to send in their sons, their brothers, their husbands, etc., to fight in a war against the spread of communism. So things are changing in America in the 1960s and 1970s especially. Okay? So those are the president's policies on the war, and that's what you need to know. All right, make sure you definitely know this word, Vietnamization, is super important. Basically just means we're leaving Vietnam. All right, moving right along. All right, just a few more. All right, 3 main reasons for the anti-war movement. So I've been telling you all along that the war was not very popular with the American public. And there's really 3 main reasons why. First of all, the war is that nobody really knows why America was fighting this war, like I said, okay? And the draft was very unpopular, and the media has exposed how bad the war is. So, the question is, why are we fighting? No one was really sure. This wasn't a case where it was like a Hitler killing lots and lots of people, killing 6 million people. This is a case of we don't understand why do we care if they become communists. It's a small Asian country. Americans didn't understand the domino theory. They don't believe in it. They think, well, it's just weird. So remember, the government is working actively to contain the spread of communism, but most ordinary people didn't really care, okay? So they're saying, why are we fighting? Also, secondly, the draft was very unpopular, and I'll talk to you about the draft here in just a second. The draft was very unpopular. All right, and lastly, TV and media showed how bad the war was, exposed the horrors of war. Every single day, Americans are being shown dead bodies, dead people, and a body count, and they're over it. They say, I don't like seeing this, I don't want to know anymore, let's get out of Vietnam, okay? Now, what actions did anti-war protesters take to show their disapproval? So they engaged in protests, all right, so nonviolent protests. And who are the main groups? They're going to be college students. And at this age, at this point in time, in this era, these are going to be the baby boomers. All right, so we already learned about this, so everything comes full circle by college students. And they are the baby boomers. Now, there is a very famous example of a protest that went wrong at a place called Kent State, in which they had a protest there. It's a university in Ohio, and they had a protest, and the National Guard was there to keep an eye on the protest, and things got a little weird, and 4 American students, 4 American college students were killed by the Ohio National Guard. So a crazy situation all around the world, a crazy situation at home, okay? When did the military draft grow? This grows under Johnson's presidency. So Johnson, like I said, he refused to give up, so it's under Johnson's presidency. And which Americans seem to be targeted? This is going to be poor, whites, and African Americans. So there are really good examples of wealthy people not going to fight in the Vietnam War, somehow avoiding the draft, but it seemed like poor people didn't, there was no escape from it, okay? How did draft by lottery work? Essentially, your birthday was drawn out of a bowl. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here in just a little bit. I'm going to finish this, and then we'll go look at some pictures, and we'll wrap things up. So essentially what they did is they wrote down 366 birthdays, because of leap year. They wrote down 366 birthdays. So they put a list 1 through 366. So 1 all the way down to 366. The first birthday that was drawn out was actually September 18th, I believe. And groups 1 through 195 ended up going to war. So they broadcasted this on live TV. I think it was even on a Sunday night. So it was like you're just watching, wondering what your fate is going to be. And it's literally just some guys on a stage, and they're pulling birthdays out of this bowl, and they're putting them on a chart, and you find out what group you're going to be in, and you just hope you're not in the first however many groups. Only groups 1 through 195 ended up going, and I'll show you the chart here in just a little bit. You can zoom in and kind of see when you would have gone to war. I was at my birthday, September 26th, and I think that falls into group 18, if I'm not mistaken, but I'll show you here in just a little bit. All right, let's get to draft dodgers. Draft dodgers are people who avoid the draft, okay? And a lot of them would burn their draft cards, all right? Burn draft cards. Or just not show up, or run away to Canada or Mexico. Okay? And then obviously the draft is super unpopular. People are like, what are we doing? We don't even know why we're fighting this war. Okay, we don't even know. And not only that, we're just kids. We're 17, 18 years old, and you're pulling our name out of a bowl, our birthday out of a bowl, and then you're sending us to go die for something we don't even understand, okay? So a lot of people ran away. They burned their draft cards, where it's basically like, well, I don't have a draft card. I basically don't exist. By the way, you could go to jail for that. Or they not show up. You could also go to jail for that. Or they run away to Canada or Mexico. Also go to jail for that. But a lot of people said jail or Vietnam, and they chose jail, okay? How did Nixon respond in 1972? He ended the draft. And thankfully, we haven't had a war big enough to where we've needed to draft. The draft was actually used in World War I and World War II and Vietnam. However, of course, World War I and World War II, the cause of the war is kind of a little more understandable. This question wasn't asked quite as much. But with Vietnam, people are like, there's no reason for us to be fighting this war, okay? All right, what images were shown daily from the Vietnam War by American television and the media? Lots of dead people, okay? So we'll just say graphic violence and death. And not only that, and a body count every day. So every day at the end of the news, my parents would tell me about this. They would watch the news at night during supper, and they would be seeing all this graphic violence like I showed you earlier, and every day there would be a daily death count. They would say this many Americans died in Vietnam. And remember, everybody is asking at this point, why are we fighting? You know, you're sitting in class with someone when you're a junior, senior in high school, 17, 18 years old. One day they're there, the next day they've been drafted and they're going to Vietnam. okay? And then you might see their number on the body count. So it's a dirty, ugly scene. It's a dirty, ugly war. It's extremely unpopular, and it's a really, really sad situation, okay? So hopefully you got all that, and let's go do one more question, then we're gonna look at some pictures, and that's gonna be basically it, okay? So how did media exposure affect American opinion about the war? Basically, Americans hated the war overall. Americans hated the war. Vietnam was a really divisive issue. A lot of people blamed the soldiers coming back from the war, and the soldiers, it wasn't their fault at all. It was not the American troops at all. They just did what they were supposed to do. They're just trying to do their jobs, and unfortunately, it was really just a big mistake on the government's part, and it was a really divisive issue in America. It's really pretty sad, okay? All right, I want to show you a few more images, and we'll wrap this thing up, and we'll call it good for today. And hopefully you learned some interesting stuff about Vietnam. So here we go, some more images. Let's check it out. So here we have, this is a tank going into the city of Saigon, aka Ho Chi Minh City now, and this is in South Vietnam. So this is the end of the war here. They're going in and they're taking over. Vietnam War's over. They're all communists. The three presidents, Kennedy, Nixon, and Johnson there. Okay, remember Kennedy, he dies too early before the war really even gets started. Johnson, he's very unpopular because he used the draft. And then Nixon is actually pretty popular figure. He does some weird stuff later, we'll talk about later. But Nixon's pretty good as far as the war goes because he ends the draft and he pulls America out. All right, some protesters here. Remember, nonviolence. They're inspired by the civil rights movement. Okay. All right, now here you go. So this is your draft, the draft sequence, how the numbers were drawn out. So they drew out number 1 through 366, as I said, and you figure out your birthday from there. This is actually from 1970. The one I was referencing, I believe, was from 1968 or 69. If you get on YouTube and type in draft by lottery, you can actually watch the live broadcast of this. I can't show it because this is going on YouTube. It would violate YouTube's policies of showing a video. But if you get on YouTube and look up draft by lottery, you can see them, and they pull out the numbers from the bowl, and you'll see how it goes down. It's really sad. It's really stressful. It's really scary, honestly. I really, really hope that this never comes back. But you can, if you want to, you can download this PowerPoint, and you can see what number you would have ended up in and which group you would have been in. Okay. All right. So there you go. So these are just some images that were sent home from the war. Dead American troops here, really, really sad. Also really graphic. I'm not going to zoom in on that one. You can if you want to. But also images like this were sent to the American public where you can see regular, ordinary Vietnamese people, babies, families, women, children, and they're experiencing just extreme terror, extreme hardship. This is just a tough, sad, terrible situation. Okay. So what's going on here? This is a South Vietnamese Buddhist, and what he's doing is he's protesting the South Vietnamese government, and he's lit himself on fire, and he is dying there. So really terrible, but also a very iconic image from that. And it just shows how crazy this war was, that people were willing to do this to themselves because they didn't believe in their government like they were supposed, I guess they have a right to. So yeah, American troops about to be rescued from the jungle after a firefight. Dead Vietnamese troops and American troops there, and then a woman being interrogated down at the bottom. So when Americans at home living a normal everyday life, when they see things like this, they realize this is just a really, really bad situation, okay? Remember, Americans, the media wasn't the same as it is today, where we have access to all kinds of images, all kinds of information all the time. Back then, you turned on the TV, that was your source of information. You read the newspaper, that was your source of information. Really wasn't much else, okay, as far as getting current information. So, all right, that's basically it. That's the Vietnam War in a nutshell. It went really fast. I'm sorry, I would like to spend more time on it, but we're kind of running out of time at this point. Guys, I hope you learned something. Make sure you download these PowerPoints. There's one that has all the information with all the notes in it that I'll put up too. And if you have any questions about anything, please email me. Guys, I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I hope you have a wonderful spring break next week. Thanks a lot. Thanks for watching. Bye.